What does an electrical engineering career actually look like over a 30-year span? By the end of this video, we will go over the career ladder, the different rungs on the ladder, and what it takes to advance, the salary ranges and what you can expect as you progress through, the titles and what they mean, should you change industries, and how that might affect your career. We'll be filling out this ladder as we go along, and at the end of the video, I'll have a nice graphic there for you that you can screenshot with all of this information filled out. There are a few assumptions that we have to make. So this is for a US-based career, and the numbers and titles will look a little different based on where you live. I think that's understood. Secondly, this is for somebody working at an established company and not a startup. A startup has very different pay packages. They might offer a low pay up front, but then with higher returns at the end. So we're not going to go down that rabbit hole. There are way too many variations. So this is for somebody in a company that has been in business at least 10 years. We'll mainly talk about a design or project engineer here. This could, of course, apply for somebody that's doing other roles such as maintenance or power quality, for instance, but mostly we'll discuss a design project engineer with a bachelor's degree, and we're not going to take into account a master's. The levels are not guaranteed and not based on years of experience alone. That's a misconception that I hear repeated way too often. You might hear somebody say, oh, I've been in the industry for 10 years, so I deserve to be at this level, or I should get paid this much. Those are not things that you should take to heart. It really is a combination of years of experience, of course, and your merit and how much you've advanced. So keep that in mind. Okay, the promotions are earned. They're not just given to you. It's not like a video game to where you just, you hit, year 5 and now you get this promotion. No. They are earned. So you yourself have to keep improving, of course. That's understood. This also assumes that you're going to stay within the same industry, such as the power or the energy sector. You're not going to hop around. So you're not going to start out as a power engineer and then 3 years later go to telecom, because that's going to affect you. And I'll talk about this more a lot later, but keep that in mind. This is for somebody that's going to stay in the same industry for their entire career. This is more going to be for a technical career path focus. However, the later titles and rungs on the ladder, of course, you sort of do have to get into some sort of management to hit those. But mostly we'll talk about the technical career focus path. This is really big. These estimates are for an average US city. So something like Kansas City or Raleigh, North Carolina, or Columbus, Ohio. And the numbers are going to change if you live in a higher cost area, such as New York City or San Francisco, or really anywhere on the West Coast. Heck, even Florida is getting up there a little bit now. So keep that in mind. You can adjust those numbers accordingly. Subtract 10 to 15% in more rural areas. Obviously, these are all estimates, okay? And some companies and some industries will pay a significant amount more. Some of those that come to mind are certain government contracts in which you have top secret clearances, things of that nature. And certainly high tech as well might pay a little more. There are pros and cons to all of this, but that's outside the scope of this video. So this is for an average US city. The full compensation package is not included in these numbers. Actually, the numbers are a lot better than what you see there, because typically the companies will pay for your health insurance. They've got other benefits too, fitness packages. They have things such as 401ks, retirement plans, and all this. That all gets accumulated. We're not taking any of this into account. There are bonuses. No, this is just a straight salary that you see for these numbers. And finally, I do have to mention this. Be aware of what your expectations are and of what is normal. I really think that social media has put a damper on what people think is normal. You may be surprised or disappointed if you don't. A good way to think about your career is to treat it almost like a strategy game. So one of my favorite games growing up was a game called Age of Empires. All right, so really it dawned on me to talk about this because I found this little civilization kind of build order. It's exactly the same in your career. So you first start out in this game with a few villagers and you have to gather resources, and that's as you're beginning your career. You have so much to learn. So the beginning is all about learning. And then over time you advance and you keep leveling up until you hit in the game called the Imperial Age, where you can build all these different units and siege weapons and build armies and wage wars and all these good things. So that's your career in a nutshell. First, you start out alone, just kind of gathering resources, gathering knowledge, gathering experience. So keep this analogy in mind. I thought it was kind of helpful. And also, if you guys play this game, hit me up, we can play together. The first rung on our ladder is the entry-level engineer. So the titles here are Associate Engineer, Engineer 1, Engineer 2. Some companies it depends on where you work, but in consulting specifically, they will have different numbers associated. I even worked for a company that had about a total of 9 different numbers associated with them. So it's just, the titles might be different depending on what industry you're in, of course, but typically it's something like this, right? You're not going to be a full-blown engineer, you're an associate engineer. It's almost like the way the lawyers do it, really. So here's a picture of me at a substation. I believe here I'm in my 2nd or 3rd year, and I was an entry-level engineer. So 0 to 3 years typically is what it is. And the pay range is about 60 to 90,000. This could vary greatly, as mentioned earlier, depending on what industry you're in and where you live. Now, what are your responsibilities? So as I talked about the Age of Empires game, you really have to be gathering resources, meaning learning all the technical skills. The company that's hiring you is not expecting you to be a genius. Yes, I understand. You just graduated with your EE degree. Good for you. Guess what? Probably most people in your company have an engineering degree, and probably most of them have their EEs as well. So you're starting back out on the bottom of the totem pole, and these companies don't have those high expectations of you that you might think that you need to show. Initially, all you have to do is keep learning technical skills, learn all the software that's associated, and just be a sponge, right? You're basically like a toddler that's learning how to walk again. Be a sponge, be easy to talk to, become a professional, right? Meaning you show up on time, you deliver what you say you're going to deliver. If your lead engineer tells you to do something, he expects you to do it by a certain time. You don't want to be late. So everything is kind of graded. No, there isn't going to be an A, B, C, D, E, F, failure thing. And you aren't going to have major labs to do and all this, but really it's everything that you do is going to be graded. So you have to work with your senior engineers, your mentors. Hopefully your company has those. It'd be a red flag if you just got in there with nobody to mentor you. That would be a very, very difficult situation. So you want to work with your senior engineers and start obtaining any certifications that are appropriate for your industry. For the power industry, for instance, I'll discuss this one often in this video. I do recommend that you go for your FE and your PE eventually. So at this point here, it's all about you just continue on learning and have a good attitude about what you're doing. That's all, right? People want to know, is this person able to work and learn? Are they able to contribute? And do I like working with them? And do I like mentoring them? So have a good open attitude about it. That's your entry-level engineer. The mid-level engineer is from the 4 to 9 year range typically. It could vary as mentioned, but that's roughly around where it is. So at this point here, you'll be an engineer 3, an engineer 4, depending on how many numbers are given in your respective company or even industry. But really here, this is where a discipline begins to be thrown in front of the engineer title. So for instance, here, I'm at about year 5 in my career, and I was a substation protection and controls engineer. So something more specific comes down into the title at this point, and that is quite common at this phase. The pay range now starts to get a lot better. So this is typically where you might crack the 6-figure range. Remember also to use the multipliers depending on where you live. The responsibilities are a little different now. So now you spent the first 2, 3, 4 years working on building your skills. There's a great rule that I'm sure you've heard about called the 10,000 hour rule. So an author called Malcolm Gladwell in the book Outliers discussed this idea. So really it's this idea of if you want to be an expert in anything that you do, whether that's playing the violin or becoming a proficient enough tennis player or becoming an engineer or learning your discipline, learning how to be a very good substation designer in this case, you need about 10,000 hours, right? That's the 10,000 hour rule. Well, guess what? How many hours do you work per year? An average in an American company, it's exactly 2,080 hours, right? Because there are 52 weeks times 40. That's the math. Let me just double check that actually. Yep, the math checks out. You work 2,080 hours per year. So at about 5 years, you've done 10,000 hours. So now at this point here, you're not going to know everything there is to know about your discipline and your industry, certainly not. But you'll be, at a good point. You'll know 80, 85, 90%, right? So the first 5 years, it'll take you that long to get to 90%, but you'll spend the rest of your career getting to all of the details and the nuances that are appropriate and called for in order for you to become a true subject matter expert. So your responsibilities change a little bit here. So now you're going to be leading your own small projects, potentially all by yourself. You might have a small team, potentially one other person that you might work with. You might be going down a certain discipline and you'll be learning about different subsystems as well. You're still gaining deeper and deeper technical expertise in your specified field, but now you're also beginning to interact with people on your team a little more. You're mentoring some of the junior guys that are coming in, such as the interns and the guys that are their first year, but also you're interacting potentially with clients and stakeholders. So you might be going to project meetings. You might be traveling a little more. This is the point where your communication skills do start improving, and they should start improving, especially if you want to advance a little further, which we'll get into. Depending on your industry, you also might be preparing for a PE license if it's required, because at about 5 years, typically, this is where you're eligible to take that exam. And as mentioned, you're mentoring the entry-level staff and other technical non-engineering folks such as designers or drafters, whoever else might be on your team. Right? A discipline engineer. At the senior engineer level, this is when things start to get really good. So you're at about the 10 to 15 year mark, and now you might have the term senior in your title, or even lead engineer or staff engineer. The discipline might also be mentioned here, but that just really depends on the company and the industry that you work for. Mind you, all these companies, this isn't done randomly. They do the research. They kind of figure out, what their competition is saying, or if you're working with clients, what the clients are expecting. That's where these titles all come from. It's not just a random thing, but these are generalities, because obviously I cannot cover the entire electrical engineering spectrum and have a million different titles, but this is just to give us an idea. The pay range now starts to really get good. So you've cleared 6 figures, and you might be pushing towards the middle of the $100,000 range as well. It really just depends on your industry, but now your responsibilities also increase. That's also typical. If you'll notice, every time you move up, your responsibilities increase, right? It's just like that Spider-Man line, right? With great power comes great responsibility. Well, yeah, with more money comes more responsibilities, right? That's kind of the game. You get paid for what you bring to the marketplace. So bear that in mind always. It's not going to be a free ride. You have to keep improving. You cannot just stagnate in your career. At this point, you are going to be leading larger projects and making key technical decisions. This is where your name might be on the drawing, or the client might be reaching out to you for a question. So if the design is a little subpar or something happened, you are going to be the one that's liable, and you have to answer questions and all these types of things. So there is a bit more stress that comes with advancing, which is of course normal. But guess what? Because you've built on everything you've known at this point, you've done 20,000 hours of engineering work for this industry that you're in, at least. You are very, very confident. If you're just starting out, or if you're watching this in college, you might think that I'll never be able to get to this point. That's not true. You just keep advancing and you keep improving. It's the same thing with like when you're working out, right? You don't just start out with 3 plates on the bench or the squat rack. No, you start off very, very light, but over time, over years, you develop this confidence that's required in order to be able to be that person. You're a very different person 15 years after you graduated college than you were in college, right? I think we all understand that to some level, but just as a reminder there. I know I mentioned that I wouldn't talk about the managerial route too much, but at this point here, your experience means that you have so much knowledge built in, and the best way to pass this on is to mentor the younger folks. And yes, you will be certainly asked to manage smaller teams of junior engineers and designers potentially, depending on the industry that you're in, of course. Even if you don't want to, there will be pressure for you to do some of this, just because your value now lies not only in executing the projects, but also in passing down what you know, and really just making sure the younger folks are learning things the right way. So you'll now really, of course, be a specialist in a very technical niche. So we talked about substation design as an example. There are a bunch of disciplines in substation design. You have to have the civil foundation for the substation. You have to have the physical layout. You have to have the protection controls. You have to understand the communications between the systems. There's SCADA. So at this point here now, you are moving into a technical niche or niche. So for instance, you could potentially be a substation P&C engineer, and your role would mean that you are now starting to become a subject matter expert into that. Okay, so you might not be the end all be all or where the buck stops with that, but that is kind of your role now. You are diving so deep into a specific subfield. And at this point, you should have your PE if applicable for the industry that you're working towards. You will continue to be forward-facing in your company and with other clients and stakeholders. So depending on your personality and if this is something that you want to take on, but obviously the more forward-facing that you are, the more of a leadership role that you'll take on. And this is sort of where you have to make some decisions about what you're going to do. Are you going to go into management and leadership, or do you want to become a subject matter expert? All right, there we are now, lead engineer. The principal level engineer. So I'm very lucky to have worked with quite a few principal level engineers in my life, and they have been so knowledgeable. It's kind of amazing. They're like a walking encyclopedia. And of course, these people now have 15 to 20 years of experience in their roles as engineers. So the titles might be principal engineer or a senior lead engineer, or even a technical consultant at this point. Just depends on the industry. The pay ranges now start to really get good. Remember, this does not include any bonuses or any sort of retirement packages or stock options, any of that. This is just base salary we're talking about here. So here, this is where the numbers get really good. And really, regardless of the industry that you're in, at this point in time, at 15 to 20 years, you should be at a pretty good spot. Your responsibility now includes, okay, so we talked about as a senior engineer, you are working towards becoming a subject matter expert. Well, at a principal level, yes, you are pretty much the subject matter expert for your team, heck, maybe even potentially your company, depending on the size of it. Many people will shoot to become a principal level engineer, and in fact, this might be the upper limit of what's expected of you in your industry or even your company. It really depends. There are other levels that I'll discuss after this with different titles, but those are dependent on really the size of your company, the industry you're in, and a few other factors. But reaching the principal level is a fantastic goal to have if you're looking to become a subject matter expert and go down the technical route in your career. So of course, at this point now, you're able to handle large scale projects and high impact projects. So this is where you're giving the expensive jobs to work on. You are now the one that has to answer high level questions. Of course, look, people make mistakes and that's okay. And something to bear in mind, there is going to be more and more pressure as you go through all of these levels. But of course, you have other people on your teams, you have other resources that you can turn to. So it's not as though we live in an age without endless information. Okay, obviously we do, right? We've got books, we've got internet, everything you could find out. You go to network, you can go networking, you can go to conferences and pick up more things and learn as well. So this is also not a time to stop learning, nor is it a time to think that you have to know absolutely everything there is to know about this. But no, it's more just you're at a point in your career where if you don't know something, you know exactly how to figure it out or to solve the problem. So that's what's required. You may not know, but you know how to figure it out. Of course, you'll still continue mentoring the younger folks. Now it's very crucial at this point that you do, because industries change and processes do get updated. So the younger folks coming in now, you're potentially 15 to 20 years older than them. So you still have to understand that the communication skills are important, because the way that you communicate is also going to be different to the way the younger folks communicate. And I see this on a daily basis every single day. I'm very fortunate to work with a team that understands this dynamic. So sharing your knowledge here is still crucial for what you're doing. You're also going to be creating tools and standards that improve processes. It could be a software thing, it could be checklists, it could just be a new way of doing things. Maybe you're making documentation about how you do something so that you can then mentor the younger folks or share it with your team or even company wide. So at this point here now, you're looking for process improvements and you'll be working on those as well. And of course, as mentioned, you are now the go-to for the rest of the team for answering technical questions. So yeah, you are the star player. Let's think about these different rungs that we had. So now, if you're an entry-level engineer and you don't know something, well, you might ask your project lead. If the project lead doesn't know something, he might ask a senior guy, somebody with 10 years of experience. If the senior engineer doesn't know something, they're going to come to the principal engineer. And that's typically the order that it should be done. The entry-level person shouldn't necessarily go directly to the principal engineer unless they're being directly mentored. So at this point here now, if you as a principal engineer don't know, then probably nobody else on your team is going to know, and we need to figure out the answer to this question. And we need to figure out how to answer whatever question that we need to have answered. A senior technical leader. So this is now a senior principal engineer or an engineering manager. So at this point, it becomes really difficult to not take on more managerial responsibilities. You certainly do not have to. If you're very good and if you're a good communicator, there will be some pressure for you to do that, of course. You're at about 18 to 25 years. You're most likely now in your 50s, potentially even early 60s. It just depends on where you are and where you started. The pay range, of course, now gets good. Even at the principal level, you could say that some of these things do start to happen. And the big one now is bonuses and profit sharing potentially could come your way, depending on your company and how it's all structured and how you perform. So this number here is just the baseline salary. If you're in a company and industry that has experienced growth and is profitable, this is where the margins could be very, very good for you. This is going to be similar to the principal engineer, but now you have more responsibilities. So now you might be leading multiple projects, teams, or departments, okay, within not only a single discipline, but potentially even multiple disciplines. So we talked about the substation example to where there are about 7 to 10 different disciplines there, but you might be leading 2 or 3 of them. So you might be overseeing the physical layout of the station, the protection controls, and potentially the transmission line that's coming in. It just depends on what combination or where you work. So this is now where you might be overseeing a lot of different things at the same time. And as mentioned, your managerial responsibilities, even if you have a non-managerial title, so let's just say you're a senior principal engineer, you will most likely have some to do just because you've now potentially been in this company for a while, or you were hired on recently, but you've been in this industry for a long time. So you are very, very well respected. So you might have some team oversight, and there's a difference between managing people and, such as, hey, coworker comes up to you, hey, listen, I got to take this and this time off. And, managers do that. And that's part of my responsibility as well. There's a very big difference between managing people and managing the projects that they're working on and the teams. So you might not have the people management, such as approving time off, but you might have team oversight. Okay, so making sure that team X and Y are working together and so on and so forth. And certainly now you're talking more in the money here. This is also where financial decisions might be coming your way. And you might have to not only bid on projects, but you might have to speak to the VPs and directors, and you'll talk potentially money-related problems and issues and things of that nature. So some financial skills here do come in handy. And yes, you will be driving innovation and strategic initiatives, forward thinking. So this is where you might make large decisions that dictate how your team does the work, not only what they work on. That's more of a director, senior VP level, which we'll discuss, but how they work on it. So, hey, are we gonna operate with this software and use these tools, and how are we gonna do and solve these problems going forward? So this is where you will really be at the forefront. And this is an extension of the principal engineer role, as I discussed, except you now have some more responsibility, and depending on how big the company is, you might see a senior principal engineer. And you may be involved in key hiring and organizational decisions, especially if those are people that you'll be working with directly. You might be doing some interviews as well, certainly. You might even interview people a lot sooner in your career than you think. You might think that's only for the seniors, but no. Yeah, I want to say the first interview that I was a part of, I was in my early 20s. I think I was an engineer level 2. And it was just really just to get some experience for me, and my manager wanted to, but also he just wanted my take on this person because I'd be working with them directly. But yes, at this point here, the senior engineering manager, principal engineer level, you will be involved in some key decisions, or you may be. Now we've reached sort of the end of our ladder, and this is certainly where the director or the executive engineer or even a chief engineer level comes in. So this is really, a high experienced person. And there are possibilities and ways for you to become a director much, much earlier than this. It really depends on the company and what's required. Now, you're not going to be a director with 5 years of experience. That would be extremely well above the curve. But at 10 to 15, you could potentially become a director. It just depends on how your company's structured. So the director level, though, there might be an associate VP, a VP, a senior VP. There might be 5 or 6 rungs above the director. That's when you get into heavy upper level management. So the director is still not necessarily upper level management. This is still, I'd say it depends on the size of your company, of course. If a company has 10 people, the director might be, right below the CEO, right? But if it has, 5,000, it may not be. So it really just depends. But really here, as you go into this area here now, it is harder and harder for you just to stay on the technical path, which is why I mentioned that most people, a great goal for a subject matter expert technical person would be the principal engineering role. These opportunities are only available in companies that are large enough and in industries that have a certain amount of growth. So here, the pay ranges vary widely, but typically it'll be 170 plus, and with bonuses and profit sharing and so on and so forth. So here now, if you are entering these managerial roles, the director and the VP, this is where the performance of your team really matters, and if the company was profitable or not. And this really does vary widely based on what you have. But here you're starting to look at a lot more of these, and potentially these bonuses and profits may get even close to what your base pay is here. So after this level here, the director, the VP level here, now you are entering upper management. Right, so the director is sort of on the border. It depends on the size of the company. I have seen a chief engineer once before, and that person really was a subject matter expert, but yes, they were involved in large decisions that affected not only hiring, but who the company was going to work with and so on and so forth. So the responsibilities here now are wide, right? So you're overseeing the entire technical strategy. So if you think about this, you started out at the ground level here, and now you're at the 40,000 foot view. So decisions that you make affect so many things. You're also strategically thinking about the future. Okay, hey, listen, if we work on this type of project, then potentially we might be able to work with these types of clients, those types of decisions, right? You're talking more business development and that nature. This is where leadership roles come into play. And even if you're just wanting to be a chief engineer, you still have to make executive decisions, because now at this point here, you're not going to be asked just to make a small decision on a single project. You're sort of being tasked with figuring out how this affects you and the company long term. Business development is mentioned and strategizing. So this is where you have a lot of conversations with the other high-level engineers in your company, whether it's directors and VPs, and you're talking about potentially meeting clients now. You are not only forward-facing, you're in the room potentially pitching and presenting for your company and so on and so forth. And you're influencing company direction and culture. So are we going to have Hawaiian shirts on Friday? That could be something that you could do. The culture about how everyone working at your company should act towards each other or towards the clients. All of these things now, you have a decent amount of influence and power to dictate how this all operates, because you are starting to drive the ship, not only for your team, but if you're in the higher realm of these other roles here, then you could be influencing the entire company. There might be a time in your career where you might just want to switch industries. So let's say you got into telecom and you realize, hey, you know what? This is not what I want to be doing. Or let's say you're somehow into the quality space and you don't want to be a quality engineer. Should I switch industries, or should I stay put? Should I switch roles? Okay, that may restart your progress. So think about it like this. So let's say at the discipline engineer level, if you recall, this is somebody who is about, let's say, 8, 9, 10 years in. They decide, let's use our substation example. You know what? Yeah, I kind of like the substation thing, but I sort of want to now become a transmission line engineer. Even though it's still in the power industry, still, you don't have the skills now to be a transmission line engineer. You might understand what they're doing, but you haven't worked on it now for 10 years. So yes, if you do make a switch, not only between industries, but even in disciplines, you're not just going to get paid the same amount here. This person here, you might be at this point, you might be at $110,000. It's going to be really hard for a manager to accept you and pay you $110,000 when really your knowledge is going to be pretty much as an entry-level associate engineer. That's what this graphic here is trying to show. So there are some times to do it though, and here they are. When there are unforeseen circumstances that occur to you. So if you get laid off or you're unable to progress any further and you're just totally stagnated, the first thing you should ask though is, okay, hold on, what am I doing that could potentially be stagnating me? And have you talked to your manager about this? Is there something else that you could be doing that can get you out of a rut, right? So ask these questions before you totally switch industries. And really another good time to do that is, if the industry is dying. and you can see it. And here are some examples here. So for instance, digital media, right? So first we had VHS tapes. If you're old enough, you know what that is, right? The tape that you have to rewind when you went to Blockbuster, another old person reference, if you will. But then we went to DVD, and then we went digital. Okay, so these trends, each one successively kind of overthrew the other one, right? Okay, so there's some foresight that could be had there. So could you move to a future-proof industry? Something to ask. So for instance, okay, all of these things, eventually the digital movement, you need data storage, right? Where does all this stuff go? And then of course, communications, look at the phones, right? Because now the digital market is being consumed on your phone. Before it was on a big old TV. So those are some things to kind of keep in mind. Start thinking ahead. Well, if my industry is dying, what can I go into that I might be able to overlap some of my skills to where I wouldn't have to have a huge drop like this. So in my opinion, I don't really recommend switching industries unless you have to, because it's hard to progress through this ladder, let alone if you're a lead engineer or if you're a principal engineer. Yeah, you can't just switch industries and say, hey, you know what, I've been doing power for 15, 20 years. I'm just gonna go to telecom. Yeah, you're not gonna start out here with 150,000, whatever the principal was making that we said. No, you're gonna come back down, maybe not right here, but you're gonna drop down a rung or two. So something to always bear in mind. Now, there are cases of people making successful switches and all that, but that is very, very rare. So just bear that in mind. If you see no career growth, can you switch businesses within? For instance, if you're working at a utility in the power space, can you go to consulting or to an equipment manufacturer, for instance, a company that makes transformers or circuit breakers like Siemens or ABB? Could you make that switch? And that is a much better switch, okay? So something still within your industry where your skills could totally translate. A consultant there might be consulting for these equipment manufacturers or these utilities. So really, these are all kind of interrelated. Ask that question. Is there an adjacent business with a different business model that I could potentially move into, as opposed to just switching my entire career around and making a career shift? Because that's really what you're doing. If you're switching industries, you're kind of making a career shift. So ask that question first. Another big one is lateral job hopping. So should you do it or not? And a lateral job hop is where you are working for company X, doing the same thing. So let's just keep our analogy going. You're a power engineer working on substations. You work for company X, and now company Y's recruiter reaches out to you and says, hey, you know what? I found your LinkedIn profile. This happens quite often, by the way, especially if you're in the power industry. Found your profile. We're in the same town. Can you come work for me for, here's $10,000 more. Lateral hopping was all the rage, especially during COVID. That seems to have calmed down now. So yes, it can be a very effective strategy to just lateral hop and keep getting paid, percentages more each time. So by the time you're done, so let's say that you were starting out at 80,000 and you lateral hopped after year 2, year 3, now you're at 100,000 or 105,000 or whatever it is. That can work, but consider the negatives. And no, I'm not just saying this because I'm a hiring manager and I'm not trying to propagate this, but here are the negatives, and these are true. When I see a resume like this, and it's somebody that it's clearly been doing this, they are still staying within their same industry as discussed, so they're not making the mistake of switching industries entirely. They're staying within the same industry, but they're hopping around. If you see a resume like that with 2 or 3 years at 3 or 4 different companies, that's a huge red flag. Why would I want to hire somebody who's most likely going to do the same thing to me? I'm trying to hire somebody that is going to stay with my team and grow. So you are viewed as unreliable, unloyal, if overused, for sure. And I think that there's starting to be more of a stigma to this now than there was maybe 3-4 years ago. Managers will be less likely to take a chance on you. Absolutely. And that to me, I don't think is a surprise. It is very unlikely that managers will call after they see your recent history. Something too to bear in mind that I'm not sure is talked about here is that you could stagnate in your skill building. If you hop around every 2 or 3 years within the same industry, but you're kind of building different skills each time, that's not bad, right? You're seeing different things, you're working for different companies, you're seeing how different companies work, how they solve problems differently, you're being mentored by different engineers, but you're probably starting projects and you're working on things that you don't finish. So you never actually see that much of it through, and that's a problem. So ask yourself, you may be actually stagnating your skills. You basically start going wide and not deep if you keep hopping different industries and roles. And that's that same thing I mentioned earlier about the ladder, how you would hop from one point here and you switch industries, you go down to different ones. Mo pay, mo problems. And you know, the biggie line, mo money, mo problems. I ended up interviewing one of my really good friends, and there's a video, actually, you can check it out. It's how she tripled her salary. It's a ridiculous story. She tripled her salary in about 5 years. So she was making about $55,000, $60,000 starting out and got up to the high 6-figure mark. Long story short, but she ended up being so burnt out and so overworked that she ended up quitting and leaving, which is just absurd. You might be watching and saying, how could you ever leave a job like this? Well, they add more responsibility on you. There's no free lunch here. Okay, you're going to get paid for what your worth is to the marketplace. So in order for you to make more money, it's not just going to be like, well, I really like this guy here, he deserves this. No, this is capitalism. Nobody deserves anything. What are you offering the company? What are you offering the team that you work on? There's an exchange here. So always bear in mind, they're going to pay you more potentially. That recruiter might call, they might pay you more, but is it a better situation? Keep that in mind, something to ask. And certainly, this is true. If you look around in most companies, they're not just hiring senior level engineers, chief engineers, directors, VPs, associate VPs, just out of the blue. No, those are typically people that have been with this organization for some time. Those roles require trust. They require somebody to understand the organization. So it's rare to see somebody who just, oh yeah, you know what? I didn't like this, but I wanted to become a director, so I found a job that had that. That certainly does happen. But for the higher leadership roles beyond the director, those are high trust roles, and you need to be at a certain spot within a company for a decent amount of time. To summarize, play the long game. Okay, think of this as a career versus just a job. If you are looking at becoming an electrical engineer, and if you already are one, if you view it as a job, by the way, people can kind of sense this, right? There's a great parable of the 3 builders who are building a church. You ask the first guy and he says, yep, I'm just building this building here. Okay, and that's it. I'm just going home, I'm working on this building, getting paid. Second guy goes, no, I'm building a church, right? Okay. And so that guy's a little more invested. Okay, I want to be building this church. The third guy says, no, I'm building the house of God. Okay, so in his mind, he has a much higher purpose. That's the whole idea here. So career means you've got higher purpose rather than just job. If you're at a job, that means all you're doing is you're working just to get paid, but you're not, you don't necessarily want to grow. And honestly, your co-workers and your management can kind of tell who is in it for the long game. So think about this as a long game. And as we discussed, right, think of being in a single industry for as long as you can. So if possible, stick to a specific industry because that'll give you the highest chance of advancing and improving through there. Remember, the promotions are not guaranteed. Okay, so you do have to show improvement, and experience is a part of it. However, you do have to improve yourself. It can't just be a thing where you think, you know what, by the time I've been here 10 years, I'll be making $120,000 a year, I'll have a good bonus and all that. You don't really know. So you've got to keep improving yourself, keep learning. Keep working on things that you might not think are important, such as communication skills, learning how to mentor younger folks. Those are all important things. You become more valuable to your team and your company. What is a promotion? It equals the industry or company opportunity. If an industry is advancing, it means the companies within it are also advancing. Plus your skills and experience, plus the timing. So the timing is also very crucial. If either of these things are not in agreement, then that your timing is off, right? So maybe you're gaining tons of skills and experience, but you know what, the industry is kind of lacking a little bit. It's going to be a little harder to get promoted there. So you need almost this perfect storm to really kind of go hard. So that's why I encourage you to do your research before you really start your career. Figure out what industry you want to be in. Always be learning. I think this is universal. Do not make the mistake of thinking, hey, I got my double E, I'm a bachelor, I got my bachelor's in electrical engineering, I'm awesome, yay. Obviously I'm electrical, I think electricals are awesome, but that's not enough. When you get hired on, you have to keep learning. So there's a good strategy that I picked up when I had my own business and I was trying to get more clients, and it's called the plus, equals, and minus strategy. I was just doing a lot of personal development, personal growth. So here's what it is. The plus is having a mentor. Okay, so have somebody above you, and hopefully, as discussed, even when you're just starting out, there should be somebody that's mentoring you about how to be a professional, how to do the role that you're in, how to learn, all of these things. Always have a mentor. If you can't find one in your company, start looking around. That might be even a good reason to start thinking of doing something else and working for another company potentially. But having a mentor is crucial, especially in the formative years. The first 3 to 5, even 10 years, it's important to have a mentor if possible. For me, it's always important that I'm constantly learning from not only my mentors, but also from my peers. So that's the equal. So learn from people that are your same level. And there's so much you can learn. It could be things that, hey, you know what, they might have a process improvement. Okay, I'm gonna look on that. Or they might have shortcuts on the software that you're using. Or they might have a different way to perform this research study. Or they might even have a different way that they're taking notes and organizing. There's so much you can learn. There's also a lot of things you can learn too by the mistakes that others have made. As you know, the best lessons are learning from mistakes of other people. Second best, learning from your own mistakes, right? So learn from your peers. Yes, you're in some competition, that's well and good, but guess what, right? The cream rises to the top. So it's good to have some friendly competition, and that's okay. You'll each get better. And we live in an abundant type of world, at least in my view. And so there should be more than enough to go around. And finally, as you start progressing a little bit, even after your first and second year, you might now be tasked to mentor some of the junior folks that are starting in. And that might be the interns or somebody who was just there where you were a year ago. Take those opportunities, because when you really solidify all of your knowledge by mentoring these other folks, right? Teaching is the best form of learning, or one of the best forms of learning. And I believe that to be totally true. So not only about the technical role that you're doing, but also now, if you're 2-3 years in, teach them how to be a professional, teach them how to write an email, teach them how to talk to a coworker, how to talk to a manager, how to talk to a project lead, how to talk to a client. Teach them. Those are all wonderful things that are going to make you better as well. So not everybody reaches the principal engineer level. That's important to understand. A lot of that's going to depend on what your ambitions and goals are, and also even just the scenario that you're in within your company, your industry. So not everybody reaches that level. Quite a few factors to this. However, you can. And what are some of the things you can do? Be dedicated and professional. Keep on learning. Strive to be very knowledgeable about what you're doing, to become a subject matter expert. That is a goal you have to set. You don't just overnight wake up one day, oh, I guess I'm an SME now. No. You've got to keep learning. It's a long game, as mentioned earlier here. Learn soft skills. I can't stress this enough, especially to the younger folks that are just coming in now. I myself am a millennial, and I work with people on my team from, you know, the Gen Z all the way up to boomers, right? Everyone has a different way of communicating, and it's important to understand that when you enter the workforce, it's not just going to be your peers. So you were just in college and everyone was, 18 to 25, 26, however old they were. Now you've got people that have been there for a long time, and you have to understand how to communicate with them. Not only that, but as you start to progress and you reach 5 or 10 or 15 years now, so now let's say you're in your mid-30s, you're now talking to people that are 20, 25. They're going to have a very different way of talking. So learn soft skills. Those are universal. Yes, I understand everything now is done with devices and all this stuff too, but if possible, keep learning soft skills, and that will help you. Even if you think that you don't need them to become a principal engineer, you do, because at that point here, your value, as mentioned, I'll say it again, it's not just about you performing the projects, but also how are you leading your teams, your project teams, and mentoring the junior folks, because your knowledge now needs to be passed down to all these other generations here, and companies look for that. And honestly, final thing is just be pleasant to work with. Nobody likes somebody with a bad attitude. At the end of the day, you want to be somebody who is open to absorbing new ideas, open to sharing, and just overall a nice person. If you're a jerk, that's no fun. You might be brilliant at what you do, but honestly, if I had to pick somebody who was totally brilliant at what they did, but kind of a pain in the butt to work with, or somebody who was, just okay, but actually nice enough to where, it kind of reduces the stress of the team and all that, guess who I'm going to pick? Not necessarily the person who is brilliant. So something to keep in mind, right? Just what is your overall attitude about everything? Where are you in your journey? Comment below, let me know. Here's that screenshot we talked about with the different rungs, the experience levels, and the different salary ranges. Let me know what I missed. Let me know what you liked. And while you're here, hit that subscribe button. It helps the channel grow, and it really motivates me to do more of these. And in the meantime, check out some of the videos that are going to pop up right over here.